Financial Post reported recently that the Canadian government lost 71,200 jobs in November.
Mm-hmm.
How is that possible when the United States economy is going so fast, so hard, so furious, creating record numbers of jobs for every demographic,
Mm-hmm.
blacks, Hispanics, women, men, everybody
Mm-hmm.
can get a job in the United States.
That's right.
We are tied at the hip to that economy. As the American economy goes, so should our economy go.
Absolutely.
Why is this number a reality in this country?
So we lost 71,000 jobs, and the U.S. gained 256,000 jobs, and that is evidence of how Justin Trudeau is destroying the economy in Canada.
Thank you.
I mean, he's killing the natural resource sector. We've seen oil and gas. They've lost hundreds of thousands of jobs. We've lost $80 billion of investment. Foreign investment has fallen by 50%. The softwood lumber sector is another natural resource sector where for 5 years under the Liberals we've had no softwood lumber contract. We've got punishing tariffs and mills are shutting down. Nothing done on the Liberal side there. Then we see that in terms of creating a competitive business climate, there is nothing but uncertainty. Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines bill, and C-48, the tanker ban bill, and a number of other regulations that have been put in place are punishing and not competitive with what's going on in the U.S. So companies are choosing not to come to Canada, and we have to fix that. We have to restore a competitive business climate. We need to put in place a less bureaucratic regulation, and we need to provide the certainty that investors need in order to come and build and provide jobs in Canada.
Right. People don't trust the current government.
Well, I mean, it's not a charity. A lot of businesses are here
Right,
to make
exactly.
money. So if you have a carbon tax, for example, here in Canada, and you don't have one in the U.S., we know locally, for example, Nova Chemicals had an opportunity to build their plant here and build their plant in the U.S., and I had to have multiple interventions with the Environment Minister, Catherine McKenna at the time, in order for her to incentivize Nova to stay here, because it was not a competitive deal. She had difficulty to understand. They have no corporate tax in Texas. They have no carbon tax. If you want to compete with that, you're going to have to make a deal. So that's what we need to do.
Where were you when Shell was trying to expand and that whole thing went down the toilet because of environmental stuff?
Well, in fact, I was an engineer at the time before
That's
I
right.
got into politics,
Yeah.
and I was working on the Shell expansion. But again, what the governments do has an influence, and right now there's a clean fuel tax that will cost refineries in Sarnia $3 to $4 billion a year. So Imperial Oil, Suncor, and Shell are all going to be very punished.
Wow.
And if you want to keep those kind of jobs in Canada, something needs to be done.
You have a science background. What would your conservative government do vis-a-vis the carbon tax situation?
Well, I think in some instances the carbon tax ship has sailed. A lot of provinces have put those things in place already, in Quebec, in BC, now Jason Kenney in Alberta. And so what the provinces have in place would be costly and difficult to undo. I would not continue down that road at all, because a carbon tax is a totally ineffective way to reduce emissions. Europe has had a carbon tax for 19 years and they've only reduced emissions by 8%. So certainly that's totally inadequate to meet the targets that have been stated, and there are better ways to get there. I think providing a regulatory regime with incentives for companies that are the large industrial emitters to actually put in the technology to reduce their emissions, that's a starting point. We know that the top 3 sources in Canada of emissions are major industrial emitters, transportation, and buildings. So there's something to be done then in the transportation industry to, invest in rail, get cars off the road, address diesel truck fume emissions, and then to look at greening of building codes and how we go forward with, emissions from buildings. Really, Canada is less than 1.6% of the total footprint of the world. So we could eliminate the whole thing and it wouldn't matter.
Right.
That said, let's take a leadership role here, and then let's leverage those excellent solutions to create jobs for Canadians and help other countries like China and India, emerging nations, and the United States to reduce their footprint, thereby actually helping reduce the carbon footprint of the world. Otherwise, we're going to be receiving the results, flooding, wildfires, and there's nothing really we can do about it with the small footprint contribution we have.
Do you see a part to play from the commercial sector? Because there's a company in British Columbia named Carbon Engineering. You know the company?
I know of this company, and Canada has got multiple innovative technologies,
Yeah.
carbon sequestration, we've got all kinds of greenhouse gas emissions reduction that's been done across the country. Green, clean tech companies that are coming forward,
Right.
all kinds of new technologies. These are the things that we need to be marketing, getting the government or venture capital funding behind and leveraging to places like China and India that are increasing their footprint, at this time they're not decreasing.
And it seems to me like the people who are truly benefiting from the carbon tax structure the way it is, while leaving out the business community too, like Carbon Engineering in British Columbia. I mean, I'm not a spokesman for them. I just think it's amazing what they've done. They've created a system which captures carbon from the atmosphere, turns it into usable fuel. I mean, it's amazing what they've done. They've upscaled it to industrial levels. Let's start promoting that part of the solution to the problem, because I see it as an anti-pollution message. If they would have come out, if Al Gore would have come out with an anti-pollution campaign, everybody would have been on board. Because even the Bible says that one of the reasons God is coming back to judge the planet is because of people who pollute the earth. That's on the list of reasons why he's going to judge this earth. So we need to be good stewards of this planet. Stop polluting the planet should be the message, right? Not polar bears and ice, and give us money. Al Gore has substantially enriched his pockets through this carbon tax system.
Well, and I think that, we've got to come from a place of giving ourselves warm, fuzzy feelings about what we're doing and actually take concrete action to solve the problem.
Thank you.
This is my engineering background
Right.
coming out, but, it does nothing to have somebody, in Canada making a big deal about plastic straws. In Canada, that is not the plastics pollution problem. It's
Right.
microbeads in the Great Lakes.
Right.
It's the fact that we collect plastics and we only recycle 9% of them. These are the kind of things that are the actual facts. And so
Right.
to get down to what is the problem that we're trying to address and what are the concrete solutions to come fix it. I'm on your page. I think we have a whole generation of people that want to see less pollution.
Yeah, sure.
That has to start with the individual. When I
Right.
was growing up, granted it was a long time ago, but if you littered, you were shamed by everybody, all your whole peer group. That's
Yeah.
gone away. People feel free now to dump their Tim Hortons cups here, there, and everywhere, and their bottles as well.
Yeah.
And so we need to come to a stewardship attitude, and I think we need to come with real solutions to a real problem, and not just
Right.
things that make us feel good.
Right, okay, 2 more questions.
Yeah.
I know you have to go, you're a busy person. CBC Radio they spend $1.5 billion every year. $1 billion of that comes from you and me, comes directly out of our pocket. I just looked at the numbers again this morning.
Okay?
Numbers are accurate, okay, you can see it
I
right
see it
here.
right there, yeah.
It's here, here it is right here,
46
right?
million, yeah.
So almost $1 billion. Now we're a country of 34 million people, okay? We're spending $1 billion on a radio station. I tuned into CBC
No,
Radio.
it's actually the combination, I think.
Well, the television is, they're allowed to do advertisements and so on. Where the radio station is not. They don't do any advertising at all, except for political campaigns. They're required by law to do it. But other than that, they don't do any fundraising. We just hand them $1 billion a year every year. And the reason I'm so agitated about this is because I have been now, it took me 6 months to get an MRI. I could have got one the same day in Port Huron. It would have cost me $2,000, but I could have done it the same day in Port Huron. Why are we spending 1,000 MRI machines every year for a radio station? Now I know there's some act that was passed that allows them to do this. I believe, it's my opinion, and you can give your opinion on this, it's my opinion that we need to defund CBC, and I think that this was a primary message of the People's Party of Canada. We're going to defund, not get rid of them, defund them so that they can go out and take a poll, okay? If you want us to stay here on your radio stations, you need to give us money, like through donations, tax-deductible donations like NPR does, and keep us on the air. If you don't want us on the air anymore, this is a referendum now, don't give us money, we'll just go away and get real jobs, instead of being on welfare, which is what this radio station basically amounts to. Talking heads on welfare. That's what they are, in my opinion, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was a big CBC fan for much of my adolescent life, and now I see that they need to just go away. And the thing that troubles me the most is it's mostly the elderly who are listening to this, because young people like my son who's 20 and myself even, I'm 50, I don't listen to CBC. I listen to podcasts. Everything's done through the internet now for people, young people like you and me and my son, right? So, and yet it's the elderly who are suffering the most from the rationing of the health care, and they're not getting proper health assignments from doctors and so on. They're waiting too long for cancer care and MRIs for my knee, and I'm in pain all the time now because of my knee. Why is that? And yet we're giving 1,000 MRI machines. Life-extending medical equipment could be purchased with this $1 billion a year, that's a lot of money, to a radio station. I mean, this, to many people, myself included, this is an abomination.
All right, so there's lots in what you've said. Let's start with, first of all, it's priorities of spending. Definitely healthcare needs to be a higher priority, and we got to look at all of the places that we're pouring money that could be poured into the healthcare system and think about that. Now, with respect to CBC, I'm not on your page that we should eliminate it, because the purpose of having the CBC is to make sure that Canadian content is delivered across the nation. And for companies that are profit-based, there's a lot of the rural and remote places that would not receive anything. Mm-hmm. And so that is the purpose of a publicly funded CBC. That said, under the Liberal government, they've increased their reach and their funding by billions of dollars, not just in the radio, but in the television. Mm-hmm. And that makes them sort of dominant, and other networks like CTV and those that are profit-based are having difficulty competing with CBC because now they're in an overreach situation. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that giving $600 million to the media in the middle of an election campaign is, at the very least, looks like trying to influence, mm-hmm. and was really not a good idea. So yeah. I think that's undemocratic, and we shouldn't see that again. But CBC does have a role to play. That said, I definitely think that we need to make sure that they're doing the role that we need them to play, which is to deliver Canadian content across the country, make sure that the content is unbiased. If this is being done with public tax dollars,
thank you, exactly.
Then I can't look at CBC and watch what's happening in Ottawa and see all the time that they're defending the Prime Minister regardless of whether what he does is right or wrong, and they're always criticizing the Conservatives regardless of whether what they do is right or wrong. I think the job of the media is to report accurately on what's happening, sure. and let Canadians make the choice. And so, especially when they're funded with public dollars, that would be my tact.
Absolutely, because it's my money too.
Well, it's everyone's money, and everyone's got a different political view, and so we can't have them skewed in one direction, mm-hmm. With public dime.
Yeah, like David Suzuki has way too much clout at the CBC. David Suzuki has enriched himself using taxpayer money, another man on welfare, and yet they don't represent all Canadians. In fact, I would say that they only represent maybe 20% of Canadians through they become like and I don't expect you to agree with this at all, but the Goebbels-style mouthpiece for the Socialist Party of Canada. Because the Nazi Party was a socialist party, and Goebbels was the mouthpiece for the propaganda wing of the Nazi Party. So I've likened this whole CBC situation to that milieu that was happening back then, that we have this socialist government that's pushing their agenda on the people constantly, and the CBC is the mouthpiece for that agenda, it seems like.
Clearly I'm not on your page
there.
That's extreme. But what I would say is, if we look at communist nations, we see that they control the media. Okay? So this is a dangerous thing. In a democracy, you don't want to see that. And so I'm not saying that the Liberals are controlling the media, but when they're giving them billions of dollars and $600 million in an election year to say nice things about them. And if you look, I'm a statistician by nature, so I tend to look every day and look at the number of articles that are out there and the percent that are, accurate, the percent that are biased, and I'm concerned. And I think Canadians should be concerned. So we need to make sure that the public dollars that go come with the same kind of criteria that are applied in business. Our businesses are not allowed to be partisan in nature.
Right.
And so that should be the same criteria, in my view, applied to the media.
And it's interesting what you just said about communism, because Karl Marx in his manifesto he used the words communism and socialism interchangeably. He saw no daylight between the two. Socialism is, for all intents and purposes, communism light. The government controls how much we pay people, how much time we have to take off, how much time truck drivers have to take 10 hours off every night. I mean, what adult sleeps 10 hours a night? I don't. You probably don't.
Oh, no, I definitely don't. One thing I would say is, it seems to me that we have a whole generation in Canada of young people who don't understand why communism isn't okay.
It's bad, right?
Okay, I've had a lot of questions asked to me to say, well, what's wrong with communism? And so we need to point to, what's happening over in Hong Kong right now, and the people rising up because they're going to basically be extradited back to China, and they know that won't go well with them, because if you disagree with the government of the day, then typically you are arrested and potentially executed, and so that's what's wrong with communism. And I think educating Canadians on what we have in the rest of the world and what is valuable in our democracy is important, because freedom is key. This is one of the best things about Canada. It's the reason a lot of people want to come to Canada, and so we have to protect our freedoms in Canada. And that means everybody's freedoms, not just certain special interest groups' freedoms. It's the freedoms of all Canadians to believe what they want, express what they want, the freedom of the press. All of these things contribute to that kind of freedom, which is key.
Okay. For the record, Marilyn Gladu does not believe that Canada has a Goebbels-style propaganda wing of the Liberal Party. She does not believe that. Those are Mike Stousnis words. Last question. This is the question that made Maxime Bernier so popular with the people. Not popular enough, obviously, but popular nonetheless.
He did lose his own seat.
Yes. So, immigration. We have people coming to Canada. I was at a Tim Hortons in Woodstock the other day. I walked in. It was at the Service Plaza, the westbound Service Plaza. I walk in. There is 20 people behind the counter working at Tim Hortons. None of them speaking English. None of them are ethnically Canadian, right? Ethnically, what is ethnic Canadian? It's a meaningless term, really, because we're all immigrants. and I think at the end of the day, we should all welcome people to our country, right? Especially since we don't have a replacement birth rate, and we haven't had one for the last 40 years in this country.
Right.
We need people, we need workers, we need innovators, we need thinkers, we need people to create the next best MRI machine, for example, the next best thing that will take us to space and other planets and so on. We need these people, we need Canada to be the country that welcomes these people, right? But the Paul Revere Society, they define a country as borders, language, and country. If you eliminate your borders, you have no country. Borders, language, and culture. If you have no borders, no country. No common language that we all can speak and understand each other and get along. And what did you say? You want to rob me? I don't understand what you're saying. Like we need to know what everyone else is saying, right? What are you saying about me? What am I saying about you? You and I understand each other. I've been on phone calls with people trying to get the 12 to stop flashing on my VCR. It's a poor example, and I can't understand a word this person is saying on the phone to me. That's a problem. That's why language is it's like a three-legged stool. You take the borders out, the stool falls over. You take the language out, the stool falls over. You take the culture out, the stool falls over, right? It seems to me that the culture, the Canadian culture, the thing that makes Canada great, the historical values that we've had in this country are not being eroded, but have been completely eroded, in my opinion. I travel around this entire country all the time. And I don't see Canada, I see the Canadian way of life as being on life support, and the evidence for that is the firing of Don Cherry, who simply called on people to put poppies on their lapel to celebrate, mourn, and remember the people who gave their lives so that we can have this freedom that you've been talking about for the last half hour, he gets fired because that is inappropriate speech in this country now. Has Canada lost its moorings? Where do you stand on the whole immigration debate? Where should we be with respect to that? Why are there all these tent cities in Quebec now, and why are now they're all enraged by it? What's your big picture thinking on all that?
So I would say Canada's always had immigration, and we need immigration. You pointed that out yourself. And while you said you wanted to be welcoming, I think the comments about the people working at Tim Hortons, you don't know if they're Canadians or if they're not. But I think what we need to do is we have to have fair and compassionate immigration, but we need to focus in certain areas. First of all, economic immigration. We want to have people to come and fill the jobs and the skill sets that we're missing in Canada, and those people can begin work and they can begin, paying taxes and helping to contribute to building a better country. I think we want to make sure that people can be reunited with their families. So we have lots of people that are here that want to have their families come over. They're willing to help support them. And in the past, that's how people came over. They paid their own way, they had their families support them, they got jobs, and they contributed. And that's what we want. What we don't want to have is what we have today, where we have 50,000 people that have crossed illegally into our country, and the taxpayer is paying to keep those people here for 3 or 4 years while their claims are heard. 60% of them currently aren't eligible to apply, and so we're paying for them to stay here, and then they need to be deported. We're not deporting them at a reasonable rate, and instead of building tent cities and encouraging them to come in, we should be updating the Safe Third Country Agreement to say, if you cross anywhere other than a regular port of entry in Canada, we're not going to pay to support you. We're not going to give you free health care.
Thank you.
I mean, they're crossing in Quebec and Manitoba. Why are they not crossing in Ontario? Well, because they don't get free health care, they don't get free legal aid, they don't get free, they're not uneducated about what the benefits are. So we want to have immigration, and we want to make sure that the immigrants that are coming fill the skill gaps, are reuniting with families, and when they come, if we want to maintain a culture that respects freedoms, then we have to train people about Canada. If they come from places, for example, that don't have laws that line up to Canada's laws, equality of women as a classic example. I would see this as somebody that traveled through the globe and was in many countries where I did not have a status. You have people that come from that country here and you don't give them any orientation. You're going to find some of the issues that we did see with increases in domestic violence and things like that, because people don't know that in Canada it's illegal. You cannot beat your wife. You cannot do things that, for example, are common in other countries. And so with respect to language, the Liberals took out the criteria that you have to speak English or French in order to be a Canadian citizen.
They took that out.
They took that out.
Wow.
Okay? So that was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And they also have changed the requirements about how long you actually have to stay in Canada to keep, your citizenship.
Yeah.
You have it forever now.
Right.
And you can be away, 4 years out of 6. And so that is not, in my view, what we want to have. We want to have people come to Canada, stay in Canada, live in Canada. We don't want to have people that actually are living somewhere else and only come back when they need our healthcare system. Mm-hmm. And these are some of the concerns that have been expressed. So let's be welcoming. Let's make sure that when people come, that we integrate them into Canadian society and help them understand how to do that.
And that's really all I was saying about the Tim Hortons thing. It wasn't that I was questioning their Canadian citizenship or whatever. Mm-hmm. What I was saying was, on one side of the counter, we have these people that were interacting with each other, speaking English. On the other side of the counter, nobody was speaking English.
True, but I would tell you, as a person who's talked to people locally, for example, they will tell you that folks that are coming here in Sarnia, we have a lot of folks from India and Pakistan that have arrived. They are reliable, they show up on time, they work hard, and they're having not the same experience with people that are homegrown. They want every weekend off, they can't be showing up on time, they're on their Facebook all the time, and they don't have the same work ethic.
Homegrown,
so,
like that,
I think that there is something to be learned from that as well.
Right. And also, I am not advocating that we get rid of CBC. I'm saying that we need a referendum on CBC, and it has to be tied to finances. that we have to stop pumping $1 billion into a radio. I mean, $1 billion. That's 1,000. I can't get off this topic, Marilyn. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I just want you to know that it's more than $1 billion. I don't want to inflame the situation.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the
but there was
numbers here,
there was a certain number that was given, and then when the Liberal government came in the last Parliament, they increased what they gave to CBC by $1.5 billion, and then on top of that, there was the $600 million that didn't all go to CBC, but certainly a share of that went there. And so
it's billions.
It's lots
billions.
Of money. It's lots of money.
It's thousands of MRI machines a year being pumped into a radio station, which is irrelevant, in my opinion, to the vast majority of Canadians. They do not speak my language. Anyway, you've given us more time than we thought, and so I appreciate you coming on. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. Marilyn, Gladu, everybody.
Of the final kingdom.
There's not only things that he didn't know, there are things he still doesn't know.
Didn't know.
Thanks. Not only things that he didn't know, there are things he still doesn't know.
Former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon has died, aged 80.
We are with one of Rabbi Kaduri's disciples.
הצלחה רבה, והצלחה רבה ומהירה, בתוך ביאת משיח צדקנו בקרוב ממש, ואז ישפיע זה על כל כדור הארץ. נעשו להשם שמע, דין השם כדורים,